The rain-slicked asphalt gleamed under the sodium lamps of the old highway bridge, a forgotten stretch of road where the city bled into the wild fringes of the desert. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour when the world felt too heavy, too silent, except for the distant rumble of thunder rolling in from the horizon. Beneath the shadow of the concrete span, a small figure huddled, a boy no older than 10, his clothes torn and muddied, knees drawn up to his chest as if the darkness itself might swallow him whole. His breaths came in shallow gasps, eyes wide with a terror that no child should know, and in his trembling hands he clutched a faded photograph, edges curled from too many desperate grips. The image showed a family frozen in happier times, a mother smiling, a father with a protective arm around her, and the boy himself grinning toothily in the middle. But now, smeared with dirt and tears, it was all he had left, a fragile shield against whatever nightmare had driven him here. The convoy approached like a storm on two wheels, a thunderous procession of 38 Harley-Davidsons cutting through the night. Their engines growled low, a symphony of raw power that vibrated through the ground, headlights slicing the gloom like searchlights. At the lead rode Elias Kane, a man whose face was etched with the lines of battles long past, both on foreign sands and in the quieter wars of the soul. 48 years old, with salt and pepper hair tied back under his weathered helmet, Elias had once been a soldier, sworn to oaths that promised protection but delivered only ghosts. A roadside bomb in some dusty corner of the world had taken his squad, leaving him with shrapnel scars across his back and a heart heavy with unspoken vows. He'd traded dog tags for leather cuts, founding the Iron Vow Riders, a brotherhood bound not by blood, but by promises etched in ink and memory. Tonight, they were just riding out the storm, heading back from a charity run in the next town over, when Elias spotted the flicker of movement below the bridge. He raised a gloved fist, signaling the column to halt. The bike snarled to a stop, a wall of chrome and resolve, their riders dismounting with the quiet discipline of men who knew silence could be louder than shouts. Elias approached first, his boots crunching on gravel as he descended the embankment, the scent of wet earth and exhaust mingling in the air. The boy flinched, scooting back into the shadows, the photograph crumpling in his fist. "Easy there, kid," Elias said, his voice a low rumble, steady as the engine he'd just silenced. He knelt slowly, keeping his distance, hands visible, old habits from diffusing tensions in places far deadlier than this. The other riders fanned out behind him, a circle of leather-clad guardians, but they held back, watching with eyes sharpened by their own hard-won wisdom. One of them, a burly veteran named Marcus, with a tattoo of a broken chain across his knuckles, murmured to the group, "Looks like he's been through hell." The boy's eyes darted among them, fear warring with desperation, until his gaze locked on Elias. Slowly, hesitantly, he uncurled his fingers, revealing the photo. It wasn't just any picture. Scrawled on the back in faded ink was a name, Lila Grant, and beneath it words that hit Elias like a gut punch. "If anything happens, find the Vow Riders. Promise kept." The realization washed over Elias like cold rain down his collar. Lila. The name dragged up memories he'd buried deep. A nurse from his wartime days, the one who'd patched him up after that explosion, her hands gentle amid the chaos. They'd shared a bond forged in the crucible of loss, her husband gone in the same conflict, leaving her to raise their boy alone. Before Elias shipped out for good, she'd made him swear, if the worst came, he'd look after them, a promise whispered in a field hospital tent under the flicker of lantern light. He'd nodded then, meaning it, but life had pulled him away, guilt and miles and the endless road. Now, here was proof that fate had a long memory. The boy's face in the photo matched the one before him, haunted but unmistakable. Elias removed his helmet first, the motion deliberate, rain dripping from the brim as he set it aside. One by one, the riders followed suit. 38 helmets hitting the ground in a chorus of soft thuds, faces revealed in the dim light. Weathered, scarred, but united in a silent oath renewed. No words were needed. The gesture spoke of honor, of a family chosen in the face of abandonment. The boy's story tumbled out in fragments, between shudders and sobs. His mother, Lila, had vanished 2 days ago, taken in the night from their run-down apartment on the edge of town. Rough men, he said, the kind who worked for the local sheriff's underhanded crew. Men who'd been shaking down folks for months, demanding protection fees that masked deeper corruption. Lila had refused, standing on principle, whispering to her son about the old promise, the riders who would come if things went south. But the boy had hidden, slipping out a window when the door crashed in, running until his legs gave out under this bridge. He didn't know where she was, only that there were signs of a struggle, furniture overturned, and whispers of a place out in the scrublands where the crooked law held sway. Elias listened, his jaw tightening, the weight of that long-forgotten vow settling like lead in his chest. Around him, the brotherhood stirred. Marcus cracking his knuckles, another rider, a woman named Riley with a medic's patch on her vest, already pulling a blanket from her saddlebag to wrap around the boy. As the first drops of real rain began to patter against the bridge above, Elias placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, gentle but firm. "We're here now," he said, his voice carrying the gravel of conviction. "That promise, it's ironclad." The group closed in, not as intruders but as shields, their presence a bulwark against the night. They lifted the boy onto a bike, Riley riding with him, arms secure, and the convoy reformed, engines igniting with a roar that echoed like defiance. But this wasn't just a rescue. It was the spark of something larger, a call to arms for justice in a world that had forgotten what loyalty meant. Elias glanced back at the bridge as they pulled away, the photograph now tucked safely in his vest, a talisman of redemption. The road ahead twisted into darkness, but for the first time in years, Elias felt the old fire reignite, not for vengeance, but for the quiet honor of keeping one's word. The desert wind whipped at their faces as they rode, the boy's small form huddled against Riley's back, finally stilling into uneasy trust. Elias led the way, mind racing through the shadows of the past and the threats looming ahead. Lila's disappearance wasn't random. Whispers of the sheriff's graft had reached even their remote rides. Land deals gone sour, families displaced, all under the badge of false authority. But the Iron Vow riders weren't vigilantes. They were keepers of oaths, and this one demanded they uncover the truth. Peel back the layers of corruption without descending into the chaos it bred. By the time they reached their outpost, a weathered barn converted into a haven of mechanics and memories, the first hints of dawn streaked the sky, painting the horizon in hues of reluctant gold. The boy was settled with warm food and a cot, his eyes heavy but hopeful. While the riders gathered in the dim light of the main hall, maps unrolled across a scarred oak table. Elias traced a finger along the routes leading to the scrublands, the air thick with the scent of coffee and oil. "We ride smart," he said to the assembled faces, each one a story of sacrifice. Veterans like Marcus, who'd lost a leg to the same war. Riley, who'd walked away from a badge herself after seeing too much rot from within. No guns blazing. We find her. We expose them. That's the vow. Nods rippled through the group, a pact sealed in the quiet hours before the storm broke. Outside, the bikes waited like faithful steeds, chrome glinting as the sun crested. The boy, peering from the doorway, clutched a mug of cocoa, watching as these strangers, these chosen kin, prepared to fulfill a promise that had crossed years and miles. In that moment, under the vast sky, the seeds of redemption took root, promising not just rescue, but a reckoning born of unyielding heart. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the outpost's gravel yard, where the Iron Vow riders methodically checked their bikes, tires inflated, chains oiled, saddlebags stocked with essentials that spoke of preparedness rather than aggression. Elias stood at the edge of the group, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the scrublands began their unforgiving sprawl, a sea of dust and thornbrush that hid secrets as old as the Badlands themselves. The air carried the sharp tang of sage and sun-baked earth, mingling with the faint, comforting aroma of brewing coffee from inside the barn. The boy, whom they'd learned was named Theo, sat on an overturned crate nearby, his small hands wrapped around the mug Elias had handed him earlier. Theo's eyes, still rimmed with the red of exhaustion, followed every movement, as if memorizing the faces of these unlikely saviors. Marcus approached Elias, wiping grease from his hands on a rag, his prosthetic leg clicking softly against the ground, a reminder of the shrapnel that had claimed it in the same blast that scarred Elias. "Scouts out yet?" Marcus asked, his voice a low baritone honed by years of command. Elias nodded toward two riders already vanishing down a dirt track on lighter scouts' bikes, their engines a fading purr. "Riley and Jax. They'll circle the edges, look for tracks without stirring dust. We can't afford to tip our hand, not with the sheriff's men crawling all over those parts." The corruption ran deep here, whispers of a network that squeezed the life from small towns. Evictions masked as eminent domain. Bribes funneled through the local precinct, all under the guise of law and order. Lila's stand against it, refusing to sell her modest home for some shadowy development scheme, had marked her. Theo's fragmented tale painted the picture, masked figures in the night, a scuffle that left echoes of upheaval, and his mother's urgent shove toward the window. "Run to the bridge, find the riders, remember the promise." Inside the barn, the core group huddled around the table, the maps now annotated with scribbled notes and circled spots, an abandoned mill on the outskirts, a cluster of trailers where off-duty deputies were rumored to gather, and the sheriff's own fortified ranch at the heart of it all. Riley returned briefly from settling Theo, her medic's instincts kicking in as she checked the boy's vitals again, her touch efficient yet kind. "He's holding up," she said, glancing at Elias with a look that carried the weight of shared history. Riley had been a paramedic in the war zones, pulling Elias from the wreckage that day, her steady hands binding wounds while Lila administered the deeper care. The three of them had formed a quiet alliance back then, bound by the fragility of life amid the roar of conflict. Now that thread pulled taut across the years. Elias unfolded the photograph again, laying it flat on the map like a compass. The image of Lila, her warm eyes, the faint scar on her cheek from a long-ago accident, stirred something raw in him. He'd failed her once, letting the road and his own demons widen the gap between promise and action. But promises, in the Iron Vow Code, weren't disposable. They were the chains that held men upright when the world tried to break them. "She trusted me," Elias murmured, more to himself than the group. "Us." A murmur of agreement rippled through the riders. Jacob, a lanky former infantryman with a knack for locks and lies. Sophia, a sharp-eyed mechanic who joined after losing her brother to a similar web of small-town graft. And the others, each carrying their own ghosts, their own oaths renewed in this moment. As midday heat shimmered the air, the scouts radioed back crackling updates. Fresh tire marks leading toward the mill. Whispers from a passing trucker about unusual quiet in the area, as if the land itself held its breath. Elias made the call. They'd split into two teams. One, led by Marcus, would approach from the east, posing as lost travelers needing water, drawing eyes away. The other, with Elias at the helm, would slip in from the west, using the dry riverbed for cover. No confrontations, just observation. Evidence gathering, photos, recordings, anything to expose the rot without feeding it. Theo insisted on coming, his small voice fierce. "Mom said you'd keep the promise. I need to see." Elias hesitated, then relented, strapping the boy into a secure spot on his bike, a helmet too big but fastened tight. "You stay close and you listen," he said, ruffling Theo's hair, a gesture that bridged father and stranger in an instant. The ride-out was a study in controlled thunder, engines throttled low to blend with the wind's howl through the scrub. Dust devils danced ahead, swirling like omens as the landscape unfolded in cinematic sweeps, jagged rocks glowing red under the relentless sun, distant mesas standing sentinel. Elias felt the vibration through his bones, a rhythm that synced with his pulse, awakening the soldier he'd tried to leave behind. Theo clung tight, the boy's warmth an anchor against the doubt gnawing at Elias's edges. What if they were too late? What if the promise crumbled under the weight of time? But as they crested a rise, the mill came into view. A skeletal structure of rusted silos and crumbling walls, flanked by a few idling trucks that screamed official but felt all wrong. They dismounted in the shadow of a boulder outcrop, signaling Marcus's team via hand gestures honed from old ops. Creeping forward, the air grew thick with the scent of stale smoke and something metallic, perhaps machinery, or the faint trace of fear. Elias peered through binoculars, heart sinking at the sight. A side door ajar, shadows moving within, and there, chained to a post like forgotten cargo, a figure that could only be Lila. Her head bowed, clothes disheveled from what the scene implied had been resistance, but her posture unbroken, a quiet defiance in the set of her shoulders. No overt signs of harm marred the view, but the restraint spoke volumes of the injustice unfolding. Theo gasped beside him, starting forward, but Elias's arm shot out, gentle yet iron. "Not yet," he whispered. "We do this right, for her, for the vow." In that suspended moment, as the sun beat down and the wind whispered through the cracks of the mill, Elias's mind raced with plans. Infiltrate under cover of dusk. Gather proof of the sheriff's hand in this. Ledgers, recordings, witnesses coerced. The riders positioned themselves like pieces on a board. Patience their weapon, loyalty their edge. Marcus's distraction played out flawlessly. A feigned breakdown drawing the guards out, their laughter echoing as they waved the travelers toward a non-existent help. Elias seized the opening. Slipping toward the mill with Jacob and Sophia, Theo guarded by Riley at the rear. The door creaked under his push, revealing a dim interior lit by bare bulbs, crates stacked high with what looked like illicit hauls, evidence of the graft that had ensnared Lila. But as they edged closer, a voice cut through the gloom, not Lila's but a guard's, barking orders. Footsteps approached, and Elias froze, the weight of the promise pressing like the desert heat. This was no simple rescue. It was the unraveling of a thread that could topple the corrupt facade, binding the riders in a web of ethical fire. Lila's eyes lifted then, locking onto his through the shadows, a flicker of recognition igniting hope. The vow, long dormant, roared to life, redemption not in fury, but in the steadfast pursuit of truth. Outside, the convoy waited, engines silent but souls aligned, ready for the moral storm to break. The dim interior of the mill swallowed light like a secret, dust motes swirling in the slanted beams from cracked windows high above. Elias moved like a shadow among the crates, his boots silent on the grit-strewn floor, the air heavy with the musty tang of decay and oiled metal. Jacob flanked him to the left, his lanky frame coiled for action, fingers brushing the edge of a concealed toolkit that held more than wrenches. Tools for unlocking truths as much as doors. Sophia brought up the rear, her mechanic's eyes scanning for structural weaknesses, the faint click of her multi-tool echoing softly in the hush. Outside, the distraction held. Marcus's team feigning mechanical woes, their voices carrying just enough to mask the intruder's approach. But inside, every creak of the building felt like a betrayal waiting to happen. Lila's form remained chained to the post, her wrists bound with rough rope that bit into her skin, though she held her head high, chin lifted in quiet resolve. No fresh marks marred her visible, but the disarray of her clothing and the faint tremor in her breath spoke of the ordeal's toll, the resistance she'd mounted before they overpowered her. Her eyes, sharp even in fatigue, met Elias's across the gloom, widening in a flash of stunned recognition. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that gaze. Years of separation bridged by a single, unspoken acknowledgement. "Elias," she whispered, voice hoarse but steady, like wind through dry reeds. He nodded once, a promise in the motion, urging silence with a raised finger as the guard's footsteps grew nearer, boots thudding against the concrete. The guard emerged from a side alcove, a burly figure in a rumpled uniform that screamed unofficial authority, badge pinned crooked, sidearm holstered low. He was mid-sentence, barking into a handheld radio about securing the package, when Jacob struck, not with force, but precision. A swift jab to a pressure point, followed by a cloth soaked in something innocuous from Sophia's kit, a sedative brewed from over-the-counter calmatives, enough to drop him without lasting harm. The man slumped against a crate, radio clattering to the floor, his words cutting off in a muffled groan. Elias caught the device before it hit, thumbing it silent, heart pounding with the rhythm of calculated risk. "Clear for now," he murmured, moving to Lila's side. His knife flashed briefly, severing the ropes with care, the fibers parting like old grudges. She rose unsteadily, leaning into his support, her hand gripping his arm with a strength born of survival. "Theo," she breathed, eyes searching his face. "He's safe." "With us," Elias replied, the words a balm against the shadows. But there was no time for reunion. Sophia was already rifling through nearby stacks, ledgers tucked into a makeshift desk, pages filled with cryptic entries, payments rerouted from town funds, signatures linking the sheriff to land grabs that displaced families like Lila's. Photographs spilled out too, grainy shots of coerced meetings, faces blurred but unmistakable, evidence of the web that ensnared the innocent under the banner of law. Elias snapped images with a compact camera from his vest, the shutter's soft whir a whisper in the tension. "This ends it," he said, pocketing a key ledger. "Exposes them all." A distant shout pierced the air, Marcus's distraction cracking under pressure. "Intruders! Get the boss on the line!" The mill stirred like a beast awakening, shadows shifting as more guards mobilized outside. Lila pulled back, her voice urgent. "The sheriff's got a back room, deeper in, safe, or what's left of it. He bragged about it, thinking I'd break." Her eyes hardened, the nurse's compassion yielding to the fighter's fire. Elias weighed the risk. Bolt now with her and the boy waiting beyond the ridge, or push further, unraveling the core of the corruption. The vow demanded more than escape. It called for justice, the kind that healed wounds by cutting out the rot. "Jacob, Sophia, cover the exit. Get her to Riley." He pressed the camera into Lila's hands. "Theo needs you. We'll finish this." She hesitated, fingers brushing his, an echo of that field hospital tent where promises were born. "Don't make me bury another oath," she said softly, then nodded, slipping toward the rear with Sophia's guidance. Jacob lingered, his infantryman's instincts flaring. "You sure about this solo?" Elias clapped his shoulder, the gesture sealing brotherhood. "Vows mine to keep, distract if it heats up." As they vanished into the labyrinth of corridors, Elias pressed on alone, the air growing thicker, laced with the acrid bite of cigarette smoke and stale coffee. The back room loomed, a reinforced door, padlocked, guarded by a single chair where another deputy dozed, radio crackling with frantic updates. Elias approached like mist, disabling the guard with the same measured efficiency, the man's slump a testament to non-lethal precision. The lock yielded to Jacob's earlier training, tumblers clicking open under deft fingers. Inside, the space unfolded, a cramped office lit by a desk lamp, walls papered with maps marking acquisitions, properties seized unjustly, notes scrawled in the sheriff's hand detailing bribes and threats. A laptop hummed on the desk, screensaver flickering with official seals twisted for ill. Elias downloaded files swiftly, the drive's glow casting harsh lines on his scarred face, sweat beading despite the cool draft. But as the transfer ticked toward completion, voices swelled outside, reinforcements arriving, tires crunching gravel, engines revving like hounds on the scent. He snatched a flash drive, evidence burning in his pocket, and backed out, heart a drumbeat of resolve. The mill's corridors twisted like veins, leading him toward a side exit where scrub brush offered cover. A guard rounded the corner too soon, spotting the shadow of movement. "Hey, stop!" The chase ignited, footsteps pounding, but Elias was already moving, bursting into the blinding sunlight, dust kicking up in his wake. He vaulted a low fence, weaving through thorns that snagged his leather like warnings. Shouts followed, a shot cracking wide, more noise than threat, the corrupt preferring capture over chaos that might draw eyes. Riley waited at the riverbed's edge, Theo's small face pale but determined beside her, Lila now reunited in a fierce embrace that spoke volumes without words. The bikes idled low, a getaway poised. Elias mounted, the group surging forward as one, engines blending into the desert's roar. Marcus's team rendezvoused from the east, faces grim but unbroken, having scattered the guards with sheer presence rather than confrontation. As they crested the rise, the mill shrinking in the rear view, Elias glanced at Lila, her arm around Theo, the family photo now whole again in spirit. The evidence weighed heavy in his vest, a key to toppling the sheriff's empire, not through blood, but through the light of truth. Yet the road back wasn't clear. Radios buzzed with pursuit, the corruption's tendrils reaching long. Elias led the convoy into a canyon's embrace, the walls rising like silent allies, buying time for plans to solidify. Redemption wasn't a single ride. It was a chain of choices, each link forged in loyalty. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in fiery strokes. As the Iron Vow riders pressed on, bound by a promise that refused to fade, toward a reckoning that would test every scar and soul. The canyon walls loomed like ancient guardians, their jagged faces etched by wind and time, channeling the convoy's rumble into a muffled growl that echoed off the stone. Elias gripped the handlebars tighter, the vibration humming through his gloves as the sun bled orange across the sky, turning the dust clouds in their wake into veils of fire. Lila rode pillion behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, not in fear, but in the quiet solidarity of survivors, while Theo nestled against her, his helmet bobbing with the rhythm of the bike. The family photo, now creased but intact, peeked from Lila's pocket, a talisman against the shadows, nipping at their heels. Behind them, the Iron Vow riders formed a tight phalanx. Marcus, on his customized cruiser, prosthetic leg braced firm. Riley scouting the flanks on her agile scout bike, radio clipped to her vest. Jacob and Sophia weaving through the narrow pass, eyes sharp for ambushes. 38 strong. They moved as one organism, bound by the vow that had pulled them from their scattered lives into this fray. Radios crackled with urgency, the sheriff's men closing in. 4 SUVs, black and unmarked, their engines a predatory snarl cutting through the canyon's throat. Elias had caught glimpses in the side mirrors, silhouettes hunched over dashboards, lights off to blend with the encroaching dusk. No sirens yet. This was off-book pursuit, the kind that thrived in the gray zones where badges twisted into nooses. "They're gaining," Marcus's voice cut through the static, steady but edged with the old soldier's caution. 2 miles back, pushing hard. Elias thumbed his own radio, wind whipping his words. Hold formation, we funnel them into the Narrows. Buy time to transmit the files. The evidence burned in his vest pocket. The flash drive with downloaded ledgers, photos of forged documents, audio snippets of deputies boasting about deals that lined pockets at the expense of the vulnerable. It wasn't just Lila's ordeal. It painted a canvas of systemic rot, families evicted from ancestral lands, small businesses crushed under false liens, all funneled to a shadowy developer pulling strings from afar. The canyon narrowed, rocks scraping flanks like whispers of warning, the air cooling with the scent of creosote bushes crushed under tires. Elias signaled a split. Half the riders peeled off to a side trail, led by Sophia, their bikes kicking up decoy dust to draw fire, metaphorical at least, as the vow code shunned escalation. "Draw 'em thin," Elias barked into the comms. "We get this out, the law turns on itself." Lila's breath warmed his back, her voice faint over the roar. "You kept it, Elias, after all this time." He didn't turn, but his grip softened fractionally, the weight of her words easing the scars across his back like rain on parched earth. That field hospital promise, sworn amid the acrid smoke of triage tents, her hands steady on his wounds, had been his anchor through lost patrols and lonely highways. Now, it wove them back together, not as lovers or ghosts, but as keepers of a fragile honor. Ahead, the Narrows opened to a flat expanse, a natural choke point where boulders clustered like sentinels. The lead SUV burst into view, headlights flaring like accusatory eyes, followed by the others in a wedge formation. No shots rang out, yet, but the lead vehicle swerved aggressively, trying to box Elias's bike. He accelerated, leaning into the curve, the Harley responding with faithful power, gravel spraying in protest. Theo whimpered, but Lila's hand on his shoulder steadied him, her nurse's calm a quiet force. "Breathe, little one, we're almost through." Marcus swung wide, his bike a barrier that forced the first SUV to brake, tires screeching in frustration. Riley darted in from the side, tossing a flare, not incendiary, but bright enough to blind and confuse, bought from a ranch supply for just such contingencies. The convoy splintered the pursuit, riders weaving like threads in a loom, pulling the corrupt apart without a single blow. Elias crested a rise, the outpost's faint lights winking in the distance like a beacon of resolve. He pulled his phone from a weatherproof pouch, sinking it to the flash drive mid-ride, a risky maneuver, but necessary. Files uploaded to a secure server, one maintained by an old war buddy turned digital watchdog, anonymous and ironclad. "Transmitting now," he announced, the signal bars flickering as the canyon interfered. Percentages climbed 47-62. The lead SUV recovered, ramming toward them, but Jacob intercepted, his lighter bike nimble as he cut across their path, forcing a skid that sent the vehicle spinning into a ditch. No crash, just delay. The vow's ethos demanded exposure, not destruction. Sophia's decoy group radioed success. 2 SUVs diverted, chasing phantoms into the scrub, their frustration audible in barked curses over intercepted channels. As the upload hit 89%, a final SUV lunged from a blind curve, clipping Riley's rear wheel. She fought the wobble, recovering with a curse that blended grit and grace, but the delay cost them. Elias gunned it, bursting onto open road, the outpost gates swinging wide under Marcus's earlier prep. The riders poured in like a tide, bikes shutting down in a symphony of fading growls. Guards, loyal vow members who'd stayed back, secured the perimeter, floodlights sweeping the approach. The pursuing vehicle halted at the fence, deputies spilling out with weapons drawn, but hesitation gripped them. This wasn't a raid they could justify, not against a fortified haven buzzing with witnesses. Lila dismounted first, scooping Theo into her arms, his face buried in her shoulder as tears finally broke free, not of fear, but release. Elias watched, the upload completing with a soft chime in his earpiece. Files now en route to journalists, state investigators, anyone who could wield the truth like a blade. The sheriff's empire teetered. Ledgers linked him to kickbacks. Photos showed coercion veiled as consent. But victory tasted bittersweet. The chase had stirred deeper currents, hints in the radio chatter of a bigger player, someone beyond the local badge. Marcus clapped Elias's back, his grin fierce under the gathering stars. Vow held, but this ain't over. Elias nodded, eyes on Lila and Theo, the chosen family expanding in the firelight of the yard. Redemption flickered like the outpost's lanterns, a promise evolving from rescue to reckoning, scars knitting into strength. Inside the barn, the group debriefed under the hum of fluorescent lights, maps updated with fresh tracks, coffee steaming in mugs that bore the vow's emblem, a chain unbroken. Lila sat with Theo, her fingers tracing the photo's edges, voice soft as she recounted fragments of her captivity. Veiled threats, demands to sign away her home, the unyielding stand that echoed Elias's own buried oaths. Riley tended minor scrapes, a twisted ankle for one rider. Bruises from the swerve, her medic's touch a reminder of bonds forged in chaos. Jacob pored over the downloaded files, uncovering a name, Harlan Voss, a developer whose shadow loomed over multiple towns, using sheriffs like puppets. "This goes higher," he said, voice laced with the ethical fire that defined them. "We expose the root, or it grows back." Elias leaned against a beam, the desert night pressing cool through the open doors, carrying the faint howl of wind over the scrub. The pursuit had bought them hours, not days. Reinforcements would come, cloaked in warrants or worse. But in this pause, loyalty bloomed, stories shared around the table, veterans trading tales of promises kept in foxholes and on forgotten roads. Sophia sketched escape routes, her mechanic's mind turning bikes into extensions of will. Theo, eyes drooping but bright, looked up at Elias. "You came, like Mum said." The words landed like absolution, easing the ghosts Elias carried. As midnight deepened, sentries took watch, the convoy's chrome guardians under moonlight. Lila approached Elias by the fire pit, flames dancing shadows on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, hand on his arm. "For remembering." He met her gaze, the vow's weight shared now. "We all do. That's the iron in it." The night held promise, of trials ahead, but also of family forged in the crucible, justice unfolding not in thunder, but in the steady ride toward dawn. If this tale of quiet courage stirs something in you, hit that like button below. It helps these stories of honor and heart reach more riders on the road. The fire pit crackled in the outpost's yard, casting flickering shadows that danced across the riders' faces like memories refusing to stay buried. Elias sat on a weathered bench, the warmth seeping through his leather vest, but doing little to thaw the chill of unfinished business. The desert night had settled heavy, stars pricking the velvet sky above the canyon rims, while the distant hum of generators underscored the quiet vigil. Lila and Theo had retreated inside, the boy's head finally nodding off in exhausted peace. But her parting glance at Elias lingered, a mix of gratitude and unspoken worry that mirrored the weight in his chest. The evidence was out there now, seeds of truth sown in digital soil, but Harlan Voss's name loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, his influence a web that stretched beyond this dusty corner of the world. Marcus paced the gravel, his prosthetic clicking rhythmically, a metronome to the tension. "Files hit the server clean," he said, holding up his phone, the screen's glow etching lines on his scarred brow. "My contacts already pinging independents, reporters who don't bend for badges. But Voss, he's got layers, shell companies, politicians in pockets. That sheriff was just the local branch." The group nodded, clustered around the pit, Riley nursing a mug of black coffee, her eyes distant as if replaying the chase. Jacob scrolling through backups on a tablet, his fingers tapping like codebreakers. Sophia leaning against her bike, arms crossed, the faint scent of motor oil clinging to her like armor. 38 souls, each etched with their own promises, vows to fallen comrades, to families left behind, to the code that turned strangers into kin. Elias stared into the flames, the wood popping softly, sending sparks spiraling upward like fleeting hopes. The shrapnel scars across his back itched under the night's cool breath, a reminder of the bomb that had shattered his squad and forged the first link in his chain of oaths. Lila's promise had been one thread among many, but pulling it now unraveled others. The war buddy who'd taught him to ride as therapy, the nurse in a roadside clinic who'd patched a bar fight wound and shared stories of lost brothers. "We expose Voss. We cut the head," Elias said finally, his voice gravel low, carrying over the fire's whisper. "But it means going public, names, faces, no hiding in the scrub anymore." Murmurs rippled through the circle, not dissent, but the gravity of choice. Loyalty demanded risk. The vow wasn't a shield for cowards. Riley set her mug down, the ceramic clinking against stone. "I've seen what these types do when cornered," she said, her tone steady, honed from years pulling the broken from wrecks both mechanical and moral. "They lash out, hit families, burn bridges, Theo and Lila. They're targets now." Her words hung in the air, thick as the smoke curling from the pit, stirring a protective fire in the group. Sophia straightened, her sharp eyes flashing. "Then we fortify. I've got contacts in the next county, mechanics who owe the vow for pulling their kin out of scrapes. We spread the word quiet, build a net." Jacob looked up from the tablet, his lanky frame unfolding. Files show Voss's next play, a big land swap, swallowing 3 towns. If we leak coordinates of his meet, tomorrow night per the ledger, we draw eyes before he seals it. The plan took shape in the firelight, sketched on a scrap of paper with pencil stubs. Riders dispatched at dawn to relay points. Anonymous tips funneled through secure lines. The convoy repositioned to a neutral ground, an old mining camp 20 miles out, defensible with natural choke points. No assault. The vow's justice was poetic, turning corruption's own tools against it. Leaked manifests, witness statements from displaced families Elias would gather personally. But doubt gnawed at the edges, ethical shadows lengthening as the fire died to embers. Elias rose, boots crunching gravel, and walked to the barn's edge, where the bike stood sentinel, chrome dulled by dust but unyielding. The wind carried the faint, earthy scent of sage from the canyon, mingling with the lingering exhaust of their escape. Inside, Lila waited by the cot where Theo slept, his small chest rising and falling in the lamplight's soft glow. She turned as Elias entered, the door creaking like a confession. "He's dreaming of the road already," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. Though worry etched her features, the same resolve that had faced down intruders in the dead of night. Elias leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "We hit Voss where it hurts, truth. But it'll stir the hive." She stepped closer, her hand brushing his sleeve, the touch electric with shared history. "You didn't have to come back for this. The promise was a whisper in a tent, years gone." He met her eyes, the nurse's compassion now laced with the steel of survival. "Whispers echo, Lila. That's what keeps us riding." Their conversation wove through the quiet hours, fragments of the past surfacing like ghosts in the dim. The explosion's roar, her hands binding his wounds amid the chaos, the oath sworn under lantern flicker. "I thought you'd forgotten," she admitted, voice soft as the blanket she tucked around Theo. Elias shook his head, the salt and pepper strands catching the light. "Forgotten. It was the chain that held me together when everything else broke." Redemption wasn't a destination, he realized then. It was this, standing in the half-light, mending what time had frayed with a boy who bridged the gap. Outside, the riders rotated watches. Engines tested in low purrs, the outpost humming with purpose. Dawn crept in reluctant, painting the sky in pale streaks of rose and gold, the canyon awakening with the calls of early birds slicing the hush. Elias gathered the core team in the yard, dew glistening on the bikes like unshed tears. We ride scattered, cover more ground, less profile, meet at the camp by noon. Nods sealed it. Helmets donned not in unison this time, but with individual resolve, each rider carrying a piece of the vow. Marcus clapped shoulders, Riley checked packs, Sophia revved her engine in a test that echoed defiance. Theo stirred at the noise, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and Lila lifted him to watch from the porch, her arm around his shoulders, a picture of chosen family taking root. As Elias mounted his Harley, the familiar thrum vibrating through him, he glanced back at the outpost, its weathered walls a testament to endurance. The road ahead twisted into the scrublands, toward Voss's unraveling, but the true path was inward, honoring the scars, the losses, the promises that outlasted bullets and badges. The convoy dispersed like arrows from a bow, engines fading into the morning's embrace, loyalty their compass in the gathering storm. Justice waited not in vengeance, but in the unbreaking line of those who rode for the forgotten, the boy under the bridge, the mother who stood firm, the riders who removed their helmets and chose to see. The morning sun climbed relentlessly over the scrublands, turning the air into a shimmering haze that distorted the horizon like a fever dream. Elias rode alone for the first leg, his Harley cutting a solitary path through the dust-choked trails. The engine's steady thrum, a counterpoint to the whirlwind in his mind. The flash drive's contents burned in his vest pocket, a digital ledger of betrayal that could shatter Harlan Voss's empire. Names of complicit officials, blueprints of land grabs that orphaned families, audio of backroom deals whispered in smoke-filled rooms. But exposure demanded precision. One wrong leak, and the web would snap back, ensnaring the innocent. Elias's scars pulled tight under his leather, echoes of the explosion that had birthed his first vow, now layered with Lila's gaze from the night before. Trust rekindled, fragile as desert bloom. By noon, the mining camp materialized from the heat mirage, a cluster of rusted shacks huddled against a sheer cliff face. Relics of booms long faded, now a neutral ground laced with hidden vantage points. The riders converged like tributaries to a river, bikes parking in a loose semicircle that blended with the terrain. Chrome muted under tarps, engines silenced to avoid echoing through the canyons. Marcus arrived first, his cruiser kicking up a final plume of red dust, prosthetic legs swinging down as he scanned the approaches. "Clear so far," he reported over the private channel, voice gravelly with the weight of watchfulness. Riley and Jacob followed, her scout bike trailing faint tire ghosts, his tablet already syncing with a jury-rigged antenna, jury-rigged from camp scrap. Sophia brought up the rear with a trailer of supplies, water cans, encrypted burners, and maps annotated in her precise hand. Lila and Theo waited in the shade of the largest shack. The boy perched on a crate with a borrowed jacket too big for his frame, eyes wide at the unfolding ritual. The air carried the dry bite of sun-warmed stone and the faint metallic tang of old ore veins exposed by erosion. Elias dismounted, boots crunching on brittle gravel, and knelt to Theo's level, ruffling his hair with a gloved hand. "You holding steady, kid?" Theo nodded, clutching the faded photo like a shield, his small voice cutting through the hush. "When do we make them pay?" Elias's smile was wry, tempered by the moral tightrope they walked. "Not pay. Answer. Truth's the only debt that sticks." Lila met his eyes then, her presence a quiet anchor, the nurse's poise unbroken, even as shadows of captivity lingered in her posture. The group gathered in the shack's dim interior, light filtering through cracked boards in dusty shafts that painted their faces in stark relief. Jacob projected the files onto a salvaged screen, the glow illuminating ledgers like forbidden scripture. Voss's signature on eviction orders, bribes traced to state coffers, a timeline linking the sheriff's crew to broader schemes that displaced dozens. "Meets tonight," Jacob said, pointing to a circled ranch on the digital map, coordinates pulsing red. Voss, with his inner circle, sealing the land swap. "We plant the seeds there. Anonymous drops to insiders who might flip. Recordings timed to go viral if they don't." Murmurs of assent rippled through the riders, a tapestry of resolve. Veterans who'd traded uniforms for cuts. Mechanics who'd fixed more than engines, all bound by oaths that outlasted rust. Elias outlined the play, small teams infiltrating the ranch's perimeter under cover of twilight. No direct confrontation, just precision strikes of information. Sophia would hack a weak security feed, looping footage to mask their ghosts. Riley and Marcus would pose as drifters at the outer gates, ears open for confessions. Jacob handling the digital payload, seeding files to a network of allied watchdogs, journalists, activists, even a rogue attorney from Elias's war days. Lila insisted on joining the perimeter watch, her knowledge of the sheriff's tactics from captivity a edge sharper than any blade. "I know their tells," she said, voice steady as the cliff outside. Theo stayed back with a sentry, his role symbolic. The boy under the bridge, now the spark that ignited their fire. As the sun dipped, bleeding crimson across the canyons, the riders moved out in waves, bikes throttled to whispers that blended with the wind's low moan. The ranch sprawled like a fortified oasis, floodlights carving pools of yellow against the encroaching dark, the scent of irrigated grass clashing with the desert's arid breath. Elias slipped through a dry wash, heart sinking with the night's pulse, the vow a steady drum in his veins. Sophia's hack fed clean through his earpiece. "Loops live. Your ghosts." Inside the wire, shadows stirred. Voss's men patrolling with the arrogance of untouchables, radios buzzing with complacency. The drop unfolded like a choreographed dance. Riley's feigned breakdown at the gate drawing guards into banter. Marcus's gruff questions eliciting boasts about the big score. Jacob's drone, a quiet mod from camp parts, whirred overhead, deploying micro-drives into ventilation shafts, files auto-uploading to waiting servers. Elias positioned near the main house, a window cracked just enough for audio capture, Voss's voice, oily and assured, sealing deals with handshakes that reeked of theft. "This town's ours by dawn," he chuckled, oblivious to the recorder's silent vigil. Lila, hidden in the scrub, snapped photos of faces and documents glimpsed through blinds, her hands steady despite the ghosts of chains. Tension coiled as a patrol veered close, boots scuffing earth, but the vow's patience held. Retreat signals flashing in coded lights, the team melting back into the night like ink in water. By moonrise they regrouped at the camp, the air electric with success. Files disseminated, tips flooding lines, the first cracks appearing in Voss's facade as anonymous posts lit up networks. Reporters swarmed by midnight, state badges mobilizing under the glare of exposure. No blood spilled, no cycles of vengeance, just the poetic justice of truth uncoiling, wrapping the corrupt in their own lies. Back at the shack, dawn's first light filtered through, gilding the riders' weary faces as news trickled in. The sheriff in cuffs, Voss's empire fracturing under investigations that promised real accountability. Lila held Theo close, the photo now a bridge to tomorrow, her whisper to Elias carrying the weight of closure. The promise. It saved us all. He nodded, the scars across his back easing in the warmth. Redemption not a solitary ride, but a shared horizon. The Iron Vow riders stood together, helmets off in the morning glow, a family chosen in the fire of honor, 38 strong. their chain unbroken, riding into a world mended by quiet courage. If these tales of promises kept and hearts united touch your soul, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Your support keeps the road open for more stories of redemption and unbreakable bonds.